First thing I want to acknowledge is that choosing Split Second as the first movie of the roundup is kind of a cop-out. I wanted to cover some of the forgotten and obscure gems of the era, and Split Second is neither forgotten nor obscure. If you're into retro movies to the point where you found this video, odds are you already have a favorite scene from Split Second. However, the roundup isn't so much to review retro movies from the 90s as it is to discuss some of the wonderful weirdness that came from a decade where the genre of low to mid-budget action movies was going through a transitionary period and the tropes you could expect were ill-defined. Sometimes these movies were good, a lot of times they were really bad. Either way, they were interesting. But I wanted the first movie of the roundup to be a positive one where I could do a whole video just on the 90s craziness of the film and still end with a wholehearted recommendation. But I also needed more practice in this format before I can do the beautiful disaster that is Boogie Boy justice. So here we go, Split Second. I have a lot of good things to say about Split Second, from the supporting cast to the world building to some great set design and special effects. But top billing on the poster, the 90s insanity, and today's discussion all belong to the film's leading man, the legendary Rutger Hauer. Howard made his Hollywood debut as the villain in Nighthawks in 1981, but he really crashed into the public imagination a year later when he played Roy Batty in Blade Runner. And for a good reason. In a movie that is absolutely a cinematic game changer, the single most memorable part was the emotionally and physically unhinged performance Hauer put on in the film's climax, culminating in the greatest ad-lib in the history of the medium.
Tears in rain.
But what do you do with him after that? This guy has the same off-kilter, menacing presence that made Michael Shannon so compelling long before anyone knew who Michael Shannon was. But Hollywood just kind of saw this square-jawed, handsome actor that they knew could nail a monologue and tried to jam this square peg into a round hole that is more conventional heroic lead, which I really think is a miss that kept Hauer from being a superstar in the 80s. But now the 90s are coming along, Hauer's a little older and started taking some more esoteric roles, often with elements of dark comedy. It's time to get weird. It's time for him to make it weird. Split Second is the first movie since that famous scene in Blade Runner where Hauer really just gets to be Rutger Hauer, and it is delightful.
I can hear your heartbeat. I will find you. I'll find you. You fuck.
Remember when I said that part of 90s action movies was how the tropes that define the genre were in a transitionary period? Well, in Split Second, Hauer pushes the cop on the edge trope codified in Lethal Weapon to its fantastic and illogical conclusion. In Lethal Weapon, they do make an effort to explain how a cop who does these increasingly madcap and dangerous things continues to do his job and integrate that into a plot in a way that is, at least by action movie standards, somewhat believable. Hauer plays Harley Stone, a cop who has already been driven completely mad while searching for an elusive serial killer before the first time the audience even sees him. Stone doesn't sleep for weeks at a time, is so hopped up on coffee and sugar that he is wild-eyed and visibly shaking every time he interacts with another human being. And oh yeah, he screams at nothing while randomly discharging his firearm in public places.
Show me your face! Come on. Foster!
There's nothing quite like watching British character actor Alan Armstrong try to do the standardized scene where angry police captain gives our unconventional hero a stern talking to in the face of the kind of character Hauer is playing. You're a loose cannon, Stone. What do you have to say for yourself? That kind of talk could cost you your badge. I got a new straight-laced partner to teach you to follow the rules. As a side note, another great British character actor, Peter Postlethwaite, also plays one of the supporting role cops in this movie, and in researching this video, I discovered that he and Armstrong are in fact two different guys. Split Second was made by a studio in the UK that was smaller than the Hollywood outfits that Hauer had already done work for, and I like to imagine that he intercepted the executives by driving his car up onto the sidewalk, jumping out completely manic and out of breath, and just screaming, "Give me a gun!" Wow, Mr. Hauer, what a great in-character pitch for a movie. Movie? The best part is that whether the level of scenery chewing insanity was an artistic choice by Hauer or part of the screenplay from the very beginning, it is completely integrated into the plot. Hauer is pounding coffee and donuts literally every time he's not talking, and the fact that he basically never sleeps is at least somewhat stitched into the story.
I need some coffee. Where the fuck is my coffee?
Hey, Stone. How's the girl?
Good. Give me some breakfast. Coffee.
Easily my favorite running gag in any action movie is that a piece of backstory for Hauer's character is that he recently quit drinking.
So you're still on the wagon?
The gag is that every time someone witnesses this man, who is obviously right on the edge of either a heart attack or a mental breakdown, doing something completely batshit insane, someone will mention that he just quit drinking, and every time the other characters will react the same way. Oh, good for you.
Quit drinking. Good for you.
With complete sincerity. Not only is it genuinely funny, but it's surprisingly pointed social commentary in the midst of all this heightened reality. Now, if you're watching this and you haven't actually already seen Split Second, I kind of buried the lead. While the plot is your typical Lethal Weapon buddy cop drill, the hook is that it's in the future. Yes, I neglected to even mention that this is a sci-fi movie in favor of just talking about Rutger Hauer for 3 straight minutes, and I stand by that decision.
You fuck.
The set design and special effects actually work really well with the sci-fi hook, while not being exactly what you might expect. The setting is in the future London, where changing climate has led to frequent excessive flooding, and Split Second sells this. All the characters drive Humvees, with some plastic shit glued on because it's the future, and there are a lot of exterior shots where it's knee-deep water everywhere on the street. If you're following conventional movie logic, you go through the trouble of showing all the water to pay off with an action set piece where all the characters have to do something dangerous while trudging through a waist-deep flood. Split Second, not so much. It kind of pays off in the third act, but you didn't really need to go through all the trouble of the flooding sci-fi future to explain why an old subway tunnel might be wet.
I'm gonna fry the fucker.
The world building is mostly just there for atmosphere. Just like Split Second's hero is a caricature of a cop on the edge, Split Second's London is a caricature of the real city. Comedically damp and hostile.
Get the fuck out of my office.
It all looks very good. The Split Second had a $7 million budget, which made back $5 million, and it looks great for playing in that weight class. For context, given that this is a 30-year-old movie, one of the most expensive films of that year was True Lies, which was made for $100 million. Admittedly, True Lies had to pay the salary of Arnold in his top earning days while still having enough left over in the budget to blow up literally everything. So keep in mind when you're looking at Split Second that it costs less than 1/10 of what a big summer movie would cost at the time. And it's cool. So Captain Guy from Krull assigns the craziest cop in London a young, by-the-book partner to straighten him out, because that's what happens in a buddy cop movie. I don't want to gloss over this character. Our straight-laced cop is played by Alistair Duncan, who nowadays is contractually obliged to do voiceover work for every cartoon and video game ever made. His performance is more subtle than Hauer in this movie, because a grain elevator fire is more subtle than Hauer in this movie. But Duncan, who plays Detective Dick Durkin, so I'm just calling him Duncan, is deeply weird. He plays the character as an idiosyncratic oversharer who tries poorly, almost menacingly, to make conversation by just getting all up in people's business.
Now just relax and let the tension flow.
Listen, pal.
It's so specific and not crucial to the plot that he acts like this that it feels like either the director or Duncan himself modeled this behavior after a real person and the audience is just never going to get to know who the butt of the joke is. Something else that's really odd about the dynamic between Hauer and Duncan is how it plays out pretty much the opposite of the way you'd expect for it to do in a buddy cop movie like the one it's aping. Maybe. I'll get to that in a minute. When you have this kind of dynamic, you need the unconventional cop to be the more effective partner in the grand scheme of the plot. Otherwise, why are the other cops and us, the audience, tolerating this dude firing randomly into a nightclub like a hero?
Where did he go? Huh?
Don't shoot!
Talk to me.
I didn't see ya!
In this movie, our by-the-book, Oxford-educated, straight-laced cop accomplishes a lot more in actually solving the murders and tracking the serial killer. Maybe. I'll get to that in a second. Alright. So it's a sci-fi movie, and the serial killer is actually a monster or alien? Maybe. I'll get to that in a split second. Okay. Duncan playing Dirk. Alistair Duncan playing Detective Dick Durkin.
Detective Dick Durkin.
Dick Durkin.
What's so great about Dick Durkin?
Okay. Duncan, playing Durkin, does what Duncan Durkin does and traces evidence to create a profile of a serial killer who is obsessed with astrology and thinks he's becoming Satan with patterns of his killing. Then that might be correct.
I've been wondering why he only kills during the high tide. I'll bet it has something to do with it. Astrological alignment of the stars in conjunction with the new moon.
They also find DNA of the killer and/or monster at various crime scenes, and it contains traces of genetic material from all of his victims.
It has the DNA structure of all its victims.
So maybe it's a kind of future mutant alien, and Durkin's profile is a red herring, or maybe it used to be human or is human enough that Duncan is spot on. Also, really only 3 characters ever directly interact with the monster in this movie. As established, Hauer is nuttier than an outhouse rat from Jump Street.
I followed him down an alleyway. He shot a trash can.
Sounds like Stone.
The other 2 characters are both deliberately shown to be driven mad in their attempts to find the killer.
Scorpio is the sign most susceptible to the powers of darkness. To Scorpio, the idea of being joined with a supernatural being is of the utmost importance.
So one could argue that there being a monster at all is just a case of an unreliable narrator, but we gotta put something on the poster. This movie cost $7 million. The fact that the identity and capture of the serial killer in this murder mystery serial killer movie is only vaguely resolved and generally unimportant to the film as a whole, I consider a big plus, both in the 90s-ness of the whole affair and the way that Split Second differentiates itself from the pack. I would be remiss if I went through the whole discussion and didn't mention that right around halfway through the second act, someone on the production team remembered that women exist and there should be one in the movie. They then shined the Kim Cattrall signal into the night sky, and she walked in wearing jeans and a t-shirt, still rocking the haircut she had from playing a Vulcan in Star Trek VI. That's not even really a joke. Star Trek VI and Split Second came out less than 5 months apart, and if one had a more difficult post-production schedule than the other, it's very easy to imagine Cattrall just taking off her fake ears and Starfleet uniform and bouncing over to do Split Second. The woman is a working actress. She's got shit to do. This is the future. This is also the future. This is how future ladies cut their hair. Stop asking questions. Anyway, ever since I saw Kim Cattrall burst through the doors in Big Trouble in Little China, put her hands on her hips, and deliver exposition as quickly as possible, I knew this woman had a superpower. She always knows exactly what kind of movie she's making, exactly what kind of performance that movie demands, and is not afraid to also get weird. So while she might have walked on set being the obligatory love interest, one conversation with Rutger Hauer later, and we get this.
It bit me!
Don't worry about it.
The fridge touched him.
Harley! Rat bastard!
Move!
Is Split Second the most interesting or offbeat movie I wanted to discuss in this series? No, that's Boogie Boy. But it's arguably the most movie of them. It looks good. The monster costume isn't the best, but it's not the worst, and like I said, it's not all that important to the experience. It takes a basic plotline and some tropes that you're used to seeing and presents them in a way that's sometimes pretty out there, but is also still accessible. I think Split Second is a worthwhile watch just on its face. Hauer's performance alone is worth the price of admission. But it's also a really strong starting point if you're getting into some of the 90s weirdness that I'm so fond of, because it doesn't just throw you into the deep end of the pool. Again, that's Boogie Boy.
You fuck.